Saffron Callahan was a force to be reckoned with. From a young age, she exhibited a fierce determination and an insatiable curiosity that set her apart from her peers. Born to Liam and Fiona Callahan, Saffron's early years were marked by instability. Her father's struggle with alcoholism and her mother's subsequent depression created a tumultuous home environment. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, Saffron developed a resilience and drive that would shape her future. At school, Saffron excelled academically and socially. She was editor of the school newspaper, captain of the debate team, and a straight-A student. Her teachers often remarked on her ability to see through facades and uncover hidden truths, a skill that would later draw her to journalism. When her parents divorced during her sophomore year of college, Saffron found herself at a crossroads, unwilling to choose between her parents and needing a stable environment to continue her studies. She accepted her Uncle Everett and Aunt Constance's offer to live with them. Moving into the Callahan family home was a turning point for Saffron. For the first time, she experienced the stability and support she had always craved. Everett, in particular, took an interest in nurturing her talents, often engaging her in discussions about politics, business, and current events. Everett Callahan was the epitome of the American dream. At 45, he had built a real estate empire from the ground up, transforming it into one of the most successful firms in the Northeast. His magnetic personality and sharp business acumen had earned him both admirers and enemies in equal measure. Standing tall with salt and pepper hair, Everett cut an imposing figure. He had a way of commanding any room he entered, his charm and wit drawing people in like moths to a flame. Everett's childhood had been markedly different from his current life of luxury. Growing up in a working-class family, he had learned the value of hard work and ambition from an early age. His father, a construction worker, and his mother, a waitress, had instilled in him a drive to succeed that bordered on obsession. After putting himself through college and business school, Everett had thrown himself into the world of real estate. His ability to spot potential where others saw only dilapidation had quickly set him apart from his peers. Within a decade, he had transformed the company from a small local firm into a regional powerhouse. To the outside world, Everett appeared to have it all: a beautiful wife, 2 children, a successful business, and a reputation as a pillar of the community. He served on the boards of several charities and was a generous donor to local causes. However, beneath this perfect exterior lurked a restlessness that Everett struggled to quell. Despite his outward success, Everett battled with a persistent feeling of emptiness. The thrill of closing deals and amassing wealth had begun to wane, leaving him searching for new sources of excitement. Everett's relationship with his niece, Saffron, added another layer of complexity to his life. He saw in her a kindred spirit, someone who shared his drive and ambition as she grew older. He found himself drawn to her in ways that both excited and disturbed him. The line between a vincular affection and something more sinister began to blur, setting the stage for the tragedy that was to come. It was a crisp autumn evening when Saffron's world turned upside down. She had been working late at the local newspaper, where she had secured an internship, when she realized she had left her laptop charger at home. Knowing her aunt and uncle were supposed to be at a charity gala that evening, she decided to swing by the house to retrieve it. As Saffron pulled into the driveway, she noticed her uncle's car parked in its usual spot. Thinking he must have decided to skip the gala, she entered the house quietly, not wanting to disturb him if he was working in his study. The house was eerily quiet as Saffron made her way upstairs. As she approached her room, she heard sounds coming from her uncle's bedroom. Concern and curiosity warred within her as she inched closer to the partially open door. What Saffron saw through the crack in the door would haunt her for the rest of her short life. There was her Uncle Everett, locked in a passionate embrace with a woman who was decidedly not her Aunt Constance. Saffron's mind reeled as she tried to process what she was witnessing. The uncle she had idolized the man she had seen as a paragon of virtue and success, was nothing but a common cheater. Facking away from the door, Safran's foot caught on a loose floorboard, causing a loud creak. Her heart stopped as she heard the sudden silence from the bedroom. Without thinking, she dashed down the stairs and out of the house, barely remembering to close the front door behind her. Once in her car, Safran sat trembling, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Shock, anger, and a strange sense of betrayal fought for dominance. She had always thought of her uncle as invincible, above the petty weaknesses of ordinary men. To see him engaged in such a tawdry affair shattered the pedestal she had placed him on. In the days that followed, Safran found herself obsessively analyzing every interaction she had ever had with her uncle. She began to see hidden meanings in casual touches, to reinterpret compliments and gestures of affection through a new, unsettling lens. The knowledge of Everett's affair became a poisonous secret, eating away at Safran from the inside. She found herself unable to meet her uncle's eyes at the dinner table, flinching away from his usual affectionate pat on the shoulder. Her aunt noticed the change in Safran's behavior, but attributed it to stress from her internship and upcoming job search. Little did anyone know that this discovery would set in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. Veronica Ashworth was not the type of woman one would typically imagine as the other woman in an extramarital affair. At 38, she was a respected art curator at the Museum of Art in Hartford. Her professional demeanor and sophisticated taste made her a favorite among the city's elite, who often sought her advice on building their private collections. With her sharp features and penchant for minimalist designer clothing, Veronica cut a striking figure. She was intelligent, cultured, and fiercely independent, qualities that had initially drawn Everett to her. Their paths had first crossed at a museum fundraiser 2 years prior. Everett had been immediately captivated by Veronica's wit and her refreshingly direct manner. For her part, Veronica had found in Everett a man who could keep up with her intellectually, something she had found lacking in many of her previous relationships. What had begun as a meeting of minds soon evolved into a physical relationship. They would meet in upscale hotels during business trips, or steal moments together whenever it claimed to be working late. Veronica, who had sworn off serious relationships after a painful divorce in her early 30s, found herself falling for the charismatic real estate mogul. However, Veronica was not naive. She knew Everett was married and had no illusions about their relationship. She told herself that she was satisfied with the stolen moments and passionate encounters, that she didn't need or want the complications of a full-time relationship. Yet, as the affair continued, Veronica found herself increasingly dissatisfied with the secrecy and limitations of their arrangement. She began to hope against her better judgment that Everett might leave his wife for her. Little did Veronica know that her affair with Everett was about to be thrust into the spotlight in the most tragic way possible. The discovery of their relationship would set off a chain reaction that would end in murder, forever altering the lives of everyone involved. In the weeks following her discovery of Everett's affair, Safran found herself spiraling into a dark obsession. Her once bright future seemed to dim as she became consumed with thoughts of her uncle and the mysterious other woman. Safran's work at the newspaper began to suffer, as she spent countless hours scouring social media and local event photos, trying to identify the woman she had glimpsed in Everett's bedroom. Her search became all-consuming, causing her to neglect her responsibilities and withdraw from her friends and family. As she delved deeper into her investigation, Safran began to experience a disturbing shift in her emotions. The initial shock and disgust at her uncle's infidelity gradually gave way to a complex mix of jealousy and desire. She found herself imagining what it would be like to be the object of Everett's illicit affections, to be the one he risked everything for. These thoughts both thrilled and horrified Safran. She knew they were wrong, that the very idea being attracted to her uncle was taboo. Yet she couldn't shake the growing fixation. She began to pay more attention to her appearance when she knew Everett would be around. wearing more makeup and choosing outfits that accentuated her figure. Saffron's behavior didn't go unnoticed. Her Aunt Constance expressed concern over her niece's sudden mood swings and distracted demeanor. Everett too seemed to sense the change in Saffron, often catching her staring at him with an unreadable expression. One evening, as Saffron was helping Constance prepare dinner, she overheard a phone conversation between Everett and someone he called V. The intimate tone of his voice left no doubt in Saffron's mind that this was the other woman. Hearing the affection in her uncle's voice as he spoke to his lover ignited a fierce jealousy in Saffron that she could barely contain that night alone in her room. Saffron made a decision. She would expose Everett's affair, but not out of any sense of moral duty or concern for her aunt. Though Saffron's motivations were far more selfish and twisted, she convinced herself that by revealing the affair, she would be removing the other woman from the equation, leaving her free to pursue her own relationship with Everett. In her increasingly delusional state, Saffron began to reinterpret every interaction she'd ever had with her uncle. The proud smile he'd given her at her high school graduation, the long conversations they'd had about her future, the comforting hug he'd offered when she was upset. All of these took on new, inappropriate meanings in Saffron's mind. As she formulated her plan to confront Everett, Saffron's guilt and shame were overwhelmed by a toxic mix of desire and a misguided sense of entitlement. She had convinced herself that she understood Everett in a way no one else did, that they shared a special connection that transcended their familial relationship. Little did Saffron know that her descent into obsession was leading her down a path from which there would be no return. The once promising young journalist was now on a collision course with tragedy, driven by desires she barely understood, and a jealousy that would ultimately prove fatal. On a rainy Tuesday evening, Saffron decided it was time to put her plan into action. Saffron found Everett in his study, poring over some blueprints for a new development. She knocked on the open door, her heart pounding so loudly Everett looked up, his face breaking into a warm smile that made Saffron's knees weak. "Everett, is it all right if I talk to you about something?" Saffron's voice quavered slightly as she spoke. Noticing her serious tone, Everett's expression shifted to one of concern. "Of course, what's on your mind?" Saffron closed the door behind her and took a deep breath. "I know about your affair, Uncle Everett." The color drained from Everett's face as he stared at his niece in shock. "I saw you that night you were supposed to be at the gala. I came home and saw you with her." She paused, gathering her courage for what she was about to say next. "And I want you to know that it's okay. I understand." Everett's shock turned to confusion. "This isn't something you should be involved in. It's complicated. And it's not what you think." Taking a step closer to her uncle, Saffron's voice dropped to a near whisper. "I think it's exactly what I think. You're not happy with Constance. You need someone who truly understands you. Someone who can match your passion and ambition." With each word, she moved closer, until she was standing directly in front of Everett's desk. Everett stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Saffron, this conversation needs to end right now. You're my niece. And what you're implying is completely inappropriate." But Saffron was too far gone in her delusion to heed the warning in Everett's voice. In a move that would forever alter the course of both their lives, she circled the desk and pressed herself against him. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Everett looked down at his niece, a mix of emotions playing across his face. Shock, anger, and something darker that Saffron mistook for desire. Then, with a forceful push, he shoved her away from him. "What do you think you're doing? Have you lost your mind?" The rejection hit Saffron like a physical blow. She stumbled backwards, her face flushing with humiliation and anger. Neither of them could have known in that moment how this confrontation would set in motion a series of events that would end in tragedy. The lines had been crossed and there was no going back. In the days following the confrontation, an uneasy tension settled over the Callahan household. Safran avoided Everett as much as possible, shame and anger warring within her. Everett, for his part, seemed determined to pretend nothing had happened, maintaining a facade of normalcy that only heightened Safran's distress. It was on a Friday evening, nearly 2 weeks after the incident in the study, that everything changed. Constance had taken the children to visit her parents for the weekend, leaving Everett and Safran alone in the house. Safran had been planning to spend the evening out with friends, a desperate attempt to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home. As she was heading out the door, Everett called out to her. "Safran, can we talk for a moment?" Everett gestured for her to join him in the living room. "I think we need to clear the air about what happened." Safran sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, her body tense. "I'd rather not talk about it. Can we just forget it ever happened?" Everett sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't think we can." Something in his tone made Safran look up, meeting his eyes for the first time in weeks. What she saw there made her breath catch in her throat. Gone was the anger and disgust she had expected. Instead, she saw a mixture of guilt, desire, and resignation that mirrored her own conflicted emotions. In that moment, the dynamic between them shifted irrevocably. Everett moved closer, his voice low and intense. "This is wrong, Safran. We both know it's wrong. But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." What followed was a passionate, frenzied encounter that left them both breathless and filled with equal parts exhilaration and shame. As they lay tangled together on the sofa, the full weight of what they had done began to settle over them. In the weeks that followed, Everett and Safran engaged in a dangerous dance of stolen moments in secret rendezvous. They both knew what they were doing was wrong, that it could destroy their family if anyone ever found out. But the thrill of their forbidden relationship, combined with the genuine affection and understanding they shared, proved too addictive to give up. Little did they know that their illicit affair was building towards a catastrophic conclusion. The web of lies and betrayal they were weaving would soon unravel with deadly consequences. As Everett and Safran's secret relationship intensified, the atmosphere in the Callahan home grew increasingly strained. Constance, though unaware of the true nature of the situation, sensed that something was amiss. She noticed the furtive glances between her husband and niece, the way they seemed to tense up when in the same room together. The situation came to a head one Saturday afternoon, when Constance walked in on Everett and Safran in what appeared to be an intense whispered argument. They sprang apart as soon as they noticed her. But Constance had seen enough to arouse her suspicions. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice laced with concern and a hint of accusation. Safran mumbled something about a disagreement over a business proposal before hurrying from the room. Everett attempted to smooth things over, claiming he had been giving Safran advice about her career prospects. But Constance remained unconvinced. From that moment on, Constance began to pay closer attention to her husband and niece's interactions. She noticed how they always seemed to be in the same room, how their conversations would abruptly cease when she entered. A seed of doubt had been planted, and it was beginning to grow. As the weeks passed, the tension in the house became palpable. Family dinners, once a time of lively conversation and laughter, became stilted affairs filled with awkward silences and forced small talk. Constance's attempts to draw out what was wrong were met with deflection from Everett and evasion from Safran. Unbeknownst to all, the carefully constructed facade of the Callahan family was beginning to crack. The truth, with all its ugly implications, was threatening to burst forth. And when it did, the consequences would be devastating. His autumn gave way to winter. Everett Callahan found himself trapped in a prison of his own making. The initial thrill of his affair with Safran had long since faded, replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. The pressure was coming from all sides. Veronica, unaware of his dalliance with Safran, had begun to push for more commitment. She wanted him to leave Constance to start a new life with her. Her patience was wearing thin, and her threats to expose their affair were becoming more frequent and more serious. At home, Constance's suspicions had not abated. Her once trusting nature had been replaced by a quiet watchfulness. That set Everett's nerves on edge. He caught her checking his phone when she thought he wasn't looking. Noticed her questioning glances when he came home late from work. But it was Saffron who posed the greatest threat. What had begun as a misguided infatuation on her part had evolved into something far more dangerous. She had become possessive. Jealous not just of Constance, but of Veronica as well. Her demands for Everett's time and attention were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. One particularly tense evening, after a close call where Constance had nearly walked in on them in a compromising position, Everett tried to end things with Saffron. "This has to stop," he had told her. Saffron's eyes had flashed with a mixture of hurt and anger. "You can't end this, I won't let you. If you try to leave me, I'll tell everyone what we've done." The threat hung in the air between them. And Everett felt the last vestiges of control slipping away from him. He was trapped, caught between three women, each holding a piece of his destruction in their hands. The night that would change everything started like any other. The Callahan family had just finished dinner, with Constance and the children settling in for a movie night. Everett begged off, claiming he had work to finish in his study. Saffron too excused herself, saying she had plans with friends. But Saffron had no intention of going out that night. Instead, she waited until she was sure the rest of the family was engrossed in their movie before slipping into Everett's study. She found him at his desk, his head in his hands. "We need to talk," Saffron said, closing the door behind her. Saffron moved closer, her eyes blazing with a mixture of hurt and determination. "You need to choose her or me. I won't be your little secret anymore." In that moment, looking at Saffron's face twisted with jealousy and desperation, Everett saw his entire life crumbling before his eyes. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was about to be torn apart by this girl's misguided obsession. Something inside Everett broke. With a roar of frustration and fear, he lunged at Saffron, his hands closing around her throat. He wanted to stop her, to silence the threats that were destroying his world. But once he started, he couldn't stop. Saffron's eyes widened in shock and fear as she clawed at his hands, trying to break free. But Everett was stronger, his grip fueled by panic and adrenaline. It was over in minutes. Saffron's struggles weakened, then ceased altogether. When Everett finally came to his senses and released his grip, she crumpled to the floor. Lifeless, the discovery of Saffron's body sent shockwaves through the Callahan household and the wider community. It was Constance who found her, alerted by the unusual silence from Everett's study. Her scream of horror brought the children running, and within minutes the house was swarming with police and paramedics. Everett, in a state of shock, had been found sitting in his chair staring blankly at Saffron's body. He offered no resistance as the police led him away, his silence interpreted as stunned grief by the officers on the scene. Detective Lena Kirker, a veteran of the police department's homicide division, was assigned to lead the investigation. From the moment she stepped into the Callahan home, she sensed that this case was far more complex than a simple home invasion gone wrong, which was the initial theory. As she interviewed the family members, inconsistencies began to emerge. Constance, while devastated, seemed to be harboring suspicions about her husband. The children Rowan and Ivy spoke of increasing tension in the house over the past few months, particularly between Everett and Saffron. But it was Everett's behavior that raised the most red flags for Detective Kirk. His effect was flat, his responses to questions vague and evasive. He claimed to have been working in his study all evening, not hearing anything until Constance's scream. Yet, the detective noted there were signs of a struggle in the room, and Everett's clothing was disheveled. As the investigation progressed, more questions arose. Why had Saffron lied about going out with friends? What was she doing in Everett's study so late at night? Most intriguingly, who was the mysterious V that appeared frequently in Saffron's text messages? and emails, the autopsy report brought another twist to the case. The cause of death was strangulation. But the medical examiner also found evidence of sexual activity shortly before Safran's death. This revelation cast the case in a new disturbing light. As Detective Kirk dug deeper, she began to uncover a web of secrets and lies that ran through the heart of the Callahan family. The picture-perfect facade was crumbling, revealing dark truths that would shock the community to its core. As the investigation into Safran's murder intensified, Detective Kirk and her team began to piece together the complex puzzle of relationships and secrets within the Callahan family. Each new revelation brought them closer to the shocking truth. A breakthrough came when forensics recovered deleted text messages from Safran's phone. The messages revealed a passionate illicit relationship with an older man, referred to only as E. The content of the messages left little doubt that he was Everett Callahan. Armed with this information, Detective Kirk brought Everett in for another round of questioning. Faced with the evidence, Everett's carefully constructed alibi began to crumble. He admitted to the affair with Safran, but vehemently denied killing her, claiming that their relationship had been consensual and that he loved his niece. However, Everett's story was further complicated when Veronica Ashworth came forward. Initially reluctant to involve herself in the investigation, Veronica finally revealed her long-standing affair with Everett after being confronted with evidence linking her to him. Her testimony painted a picture of a man torn between multiple relationships, struggling to keep his various secrets from colliding. Meanwhile, a more thorough search of the Callahan home uncovered a journal hidden in Safran's room. The entries detailed her growing obsession with her uncle, her discovery of his affair with Veronica, and her plan to confront him on the night of her death. The final entry, dated the day she died, contained a chilling line. "Tonight everything changes, he'll have to choose, her or me." This evidence, combined with the forensic analysis of the crime scene, began to paint a clear picture of what had transpired on that fatal night. DNA evidence found under Safran's fingernails matched Everett's, indicating a struggle. Fibers from Everett's clothing were found on Safran's body, contradicting his initial statement that he hadn't been in close contact with her that evening. As the case against Everett built, other witnesses came forward. A neighbor reported hearing raised voices coming from the Callahan house on the night of the murder. A colleague of Everett's mentioned his increasingly erratic behavior at work in the weeks leading up to Safran's death. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Constance. After days of questioning and faced with the mounting evidence of her husband's infidelity, she finally broke down. She revealed that she had suspected something was going on between Everett and Safran for weeks. On the night of the murder, she had overheard part of their argument, but had been too afraid to intervene. As Detective Kirk compiled all the evidence, a timeline of events emerged. Safran had confronted Everett about his affair with Veronica, threatening to expose both relationships if he didn't choose her. In a moment of panic and rage, Everett had strangled Safran, then attempted to cover up his crime. The case, which had once seemed like a tragic home invasion, had unraveled into a sordid tale of forbidden desire, jealousy, and ultimately, murder. The respected Callahan family, once the picture of suburban success, now stood exposed as a web of lies and betrayal. The courtroom was packed each day as the prosecution laid out its case, painting a picture of a man whose web of lies and illicit relationships had finally caught up with him. Prosecutor presented a compelling narrative, weaving together the physical evidence, witness testimonies, and the damning contents of Safran's journal. She portrayed Everett as a manipulative predator who had taken advantage of his young, vulnerable niece, then killed her in a fit of rage when she threatened to expose him. Everett's defense team attempted to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. They argued that the physical evidence was circumstantial and that Safran's journal entries were the fantasies of a troubled young woman. The trial's most dramatic moment came when Everett himself took the stand. Under intense cross-examination, he finally admitted to his affair with Safran but continued to deny killing His emotional breakdown on the stand, as he begged for forgiveness from his family, left many in the courtroom stunned. As the trial neared its conclusion, both the prosecution and defense made impassioned final arguments. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. In a moment of high drama, the foreman stood and declared Everett Callahan guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced Everett to 25 years to life in prison, bringing a close to a case that had shocked and captivated the nation. The Callahan tragedy left an indelible mark on the community. The family's once pristine reputation was in tatters, their name forever associated with scandal and murder.